Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be with you today to present the monitoring activity of pharmacovigilance of COVID-19 vaccines in Niger. Since April 2021, Niger has received via the COVAX scheme and partner countries Sinopharm, AstraZeneca, Janssen and Pfizer vaccines. These vaccines were qualified based on several RCTs, but unfortunately the health system in Niger was faced with the reluctance of the general population to go for vaccination, so the MOH via the pharmacy department in conjunction with WHO and Epicent have started a pharmacovigilance program on these vaccines. And it had helped to report very quickly these AEFIs so that they would be collected. At the end of May 2022, only 21% of the eligible people had at least one dose of vaccine, and 15% have completed their vaccination scheme. You have here the slide showing the evolution of vaccination and the number of cases of COVID-19 in the country. The general objective was to document the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines in population in Niger, and the specific objectives or secondary objectives was to assess the incidence of the severe adverse event and the AEFIs, and there was also a list provided by the WHO of these adverse events of particular interest, AESI as they're called, to assess them, and we also wanted to assess the reactogenicity 7 days post-vaccination, the incidence of COVID-19 severe, with the possibility of a severe disease related to the vaccine. So in order to meet these objectives, we have adopted the following methodology. We carried out the study in 3 sites, including 2 in Niamey, and when people showed up for the first time for a jab, and after an informed consent, we collected all the data on this patient and on the vaccine. This would allow us to send a message to those people so that they would answer online surveys within the 7 days post-vaccination in order to assess the reactogenicity. Every month, there was also a call, whether it was 1 dose or a 2-dose vaccine. If it was a 2-dose vaccine, we would follow them up to 4 months, up to the 2nd dose. And after the 2nd dose, there was another 2-month follow-up. So it was also possible when people were faced with a particular health problem, they could call the team to report their problem. And we have the following results. The first is about the type of vaccines available in the 3 sites. In the United Nations dispensary, AstraZeneca was the most commonly used, and for the 2 other sites, it was the Janssen. Very few Sinopharm and Pfizer vaccines were on our study, because in the first site, where we stayed for a long time, the UN dispensary, the Sinopharm was not available, and then Janssen, the 1-dose vaccine, was preferred to the 2-dose vaccine. And Pfizer arrived only late in Niger. It was only in April 2022. At the end of April 2022, when we concluded our study, we had included some 1,330 participants. We have collected 882 AEFIs. And when it came to the reactogenicity 7 days post-vaccination, I would say that the very few people actually filled out the forms. And it was usually in the first days after vaccination that we got an answer to this survey, and then the figures went down, the number of respondents went down. Regarding the characteristics of the people, the majority were male. And we also wanted to know how many women were pregnant or breastfeeding, even though it was not an exclusion criteria. And no women reported any pregnancy, and 21 reported that they were breastfeeding. And when it came to comorbidity, high blood pressure and diabetes were the most commonly reported at the time of inclusion. Now, regarding all the AEFI's data collected over time, that is fever, fatigue, headaches, which were most commonly mentioned, are shown here. And per type of vaccine with AstraZeneca, there were more symptoms reported at first dose and fewer symptoms with the second dose. There was one case of heterologous vaccine. The person had received the AstraZeneca first dose and the second dose was at Janssen, which does explain for Janssen that a few of the symptoms that are mentioned were after the Janssen dose, where there was fever, fatigue, and headache. And for Sinopharm and Pfizer, as I said, very few of those doses were used, so there were very few symptoms reported by people who'd received these vaccines. We also tried to identify COVID cases after vaccination. There were 3 cases. There were non-severe cases. The person didn't have to develop their antibodies. And regarding the severity, out of the 882 AEFIs reported, only 8 were considered as adverse and severe. The majority involved male patients, like the majority of our patients in our study. And you see the figures and the data for these AEFIs, and Janssen and AstraZeneca were the most commonly involved with these events. And all these problems have resolved systems. Now, the majority of these AEFIs, as I said, are resolved. When we didn't know whether it was solved or not, it's because those people were lost to follow-up. There was one case of AEFIs with sequela. People had a skin rash with kind of spots on the skin that didn't disappear. It was the first time that such pharmacovigilance monitoring was carried out in Niger. We were faced with some challenges because people were to fill out a survey. Some didn't have access to the internet. There was no literacy for many of the patients. And regarding the monitoring of the AEFIs, there was no case management. There was no management after that, and the investigation committee was not able to further study the immunity. But we have seen that the MOH nevertheless has collected important data on the safety of these vaccines, and there were less than 1% of these AEFIs reported. As for the future outlooks, based on this experience and the lessons learned and the difficulties we had to deal with, we might consider extending this type of monitoring to other vaccines, such as the anti-malaria vaccine, which will soon be introduced in Niger, because, as you know, it's a major public health problem in our country. And I would like to thank all the partners who've supported us in carrying out this study, along with Epicentre, who've really worked hard on carrying out this study. Thank you for your attention.